Hey everybody, Pete Smith here, and welcome to the closing keynote of the 2020 NACM Annual Conference virtual style. I hope these past 10 weeks have provided a ton of value for you, and I hope we get a chance to do the same during our time together. Now, like many of you, I wish that we had the opportunity to be meeting in person, but of course today's environment doesn't allow us to do that. But because it is a virtual presentation, I feel the need to address something with you very quickly, something that may be on your mind. I know it's on my mind anytime I watch something done virtually. So let me just address that with you now. Even though this is a virtual presentation, I want you to know that I am in fact wearing pants. I know sometimes we're wondering, like, is he, isn't he? It's virtual, do they still do that? I'm wearing pants, I'm prepared, here we go. Figured I would address that so that we can move on. You know, when your colleagues at the NACM asked me to be a part of your conference this year, I was excited to do so. And I thought, all right, I really want to be able to provide some content for you that is going to be relevant, it's going to be impactful, it's really going to get you to think, especially because this is, for many of us, our first time getting a chance to connect. So I decided to go to the #1 source of people's inspiration, of their motivation, and even their information. I went to Facebook. And what I found during my time on Facebook is that I actually felt worse about myself as a human. I mean, apparently there are some people that are achieving really incredible things during this whole pandemic. But my favorite post, the one that really stood out to me, was the one that said, Sir Isaac Newton developed calculus when he was quarantined during the Black Plague. And I thought, something immediately came to mind, and that was this. There was no way that Newton was quarantined in a house full of redheads, because you don't get a lot accomplished when that's your environment. For the past 6 months, I felt like a headmaster of a boarding school for behaviorally challenged gingers. And we're over-enrolled, and I only have 2. So clearly, Facebook wasn't going to provide me anything that I really needed of substance, so I decided to turn to a much more reliable source, and that is you, your colleagues in the NACM, your colleagues from throughout the country. And I participated in what's called content calls, and this is where I got a chance to speak to your colleagues to really get a better idea of how the world looks through your eyes. What's going well, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the struggles? And one of the questions I asked was this, what does one really need to possess in order to survive or thrive as a court management professional in 2020? And the answers I got varied, the commitment and dedication, but I also got an answer that I thought I absolutely needed to share with you. I thought it was one of the most creative answers that I got, and I wanted to make sure to share that with you. So here we go. What does one need to survive as a court management professional in 2020? Alcohol. Alcohol. My people, right? And so I thought, yeah, that was great. You could probably say that about really any profession that may be beneficial. So look, I left those calls just with a better understanding of how things are for you. What really struck me is that you feel best about who you are and what you do in those moments when you know you're making a positive difference in the lives of others. Look, we know that courts are there to resolve disputes, right? That they are there to provide equal protection under the law for everybody. That they're there to enhance the social order. And when you are able to actively participate in that, that's when you feel best about who you are and the work that you're doing, because you believe that you're making a difference. But I also understand that you don't feel that way all the time. There are many times when you feel overworked, you're overwhelmed, you don't feel that you are contributing in ways that you set out to contribute in. You don't feel like you're making that big of a difference. You're struggling with what the court is there to do, with what you are able to do. And that's just professionally. Many of you are also struggling with how to incorporate your professional lives. Now you have to do it out of the comfort of your home. All of a sudden, your personal and your professional have intermingled in ways not previously done. And that's a real struggle. And see, it's in those moments when you really step back and you begin to wonder, what's the point? What am I doing? But see, today, I don't want us to just ask that question in some rhetorical sense. No, I want us to be committed to finding out the answer, because it's precisely the answer to that question, what's the point, that allows us to thoroughly enjoy those moments when things are going well, and to be willing to weather the storm when they're not. So what's the point? Well, I guess to some degree, it kind of depends on who you're asking. I mean, if we look to society to answer the question, what's the point? Well, society is going to say, all right, your greatest endeavor, what we should all be striving for, is the achievement of both success and happiness. And now, of course, there's nothing wrong with success and happiness in their own right. But what a lot of people do is they equate the extent of their success and their happiness to something like their income. And if we look at this graph, we would say, wow, people are making more money than they've ever made before. So clearly that must mean that they're the most successful that they've ever been. And obviously what that then translates to is we're the happiest people on the face of the earth ever. And just by uttering those words, I think you can already see the cracks in that argument. Because as I get a chance to work with people from around the country, I see a very different story. I see people who are overworked, they're overwhelmed, they're totally stressed out. And that was before the pandemic. Today, we see people who are really worried about coronavirus. We see elevated levels of anxiety, depression. All of a sudden, we had these great plans of what we were going to do, a 6-month, 12-month, 3-year plan, 5-year plan. We had it all under control until we didn't, until it now looks like a bunch of squiggly lines. And so in this environment, we step back and we really start to ask ourselves, where do we go from here? How do we stay grounded? How do we stay anchored? What do we need to do today in order to make sure that we have a bright tomorrow? See, I think if we're being honest, we kind of know that there's something more than success and happiness. I think what we're really striving for, what we really want in our lives, both personally and professionally, is the element of significance. Significance. Now, look, admittedly, I didn't always think about significance in the same way that I do today. But on May 6th of 2010, my views of significance, gosh, they changed instantly. They changed drastically, and they changed permanently. Because that's the day that I had a stroke. During the stroke, I lost my speech. I was temporarily paralyzed on one side of my body. That's a pretty terrifying experience, as you would imagine. But I'll tell you, the most terrifying aspect of the entire stroke was the moment that I heard my body begin to shut down. It's the only time in my life where I truly believed I'm dying right here, right now. I have about 60 seconds left to live. In that moment, I thought about my wife, Whitney. I thought about my parents, my brothers, my sisters. I thought about the things that mattered. I also remember asking myself a really simple but powerful question. Did I live? Did I live? Did I do everything that I wanted to do in this life? Did I hold back at all? Did I run my race to win? Did I change anyone's life? Did I live? Now, interestingly enough, is that in that moment, I never once thought about, were you successful? Were you happy? Right? Because everything in that moment was about whether or not I was significant. See, at the precise moment when I thought my life was ending, one of the things that mattered to me most was whether or not I mattered at all. Did I matter? Now, obviously, the story has a happy ending. I didn't die. And I get that that's confusing for some of you watching because you're like, yeah, but you're really pale. I know. Some of you are probably trying to adjust the brightness on your screen. Look, it's not your screen. I am, in fact, this pale. You look, I'm a redhead, like this is as good as it gets. It's a good thing that we're not recording this in the winter because I'm like translucent during those months. So this is it, right? So I regained my speech, regained complete usage of my body, just a 100% recovery and really a 100% blessing. But see, the reason why I share that story with you is because what I learned from that experience is that what unites all of us, it isn't a particular part of the government that we may work for. It's definitely not just a state that we may all live in. No, what unites us simply as human beings is that at our core, one of the things we desire most is to know with certainty that who we are and what we do matters. We want to matter. We want to do work that matters. We want to contribute in ways that matter. We want to love and to be loved because that matters. Because eventually and ultimately, we want to be able to look back on our lives and say that we lived a life that mattered. So since the stroke, I've had this somewhat mild obsession to really go out and try to determine what does it mean to live in a very significant way. In other words, can we take something that is usually discussed conceptually and add some practicality to it? So I went out and connected with people in a much different way. I connected with people that always seemed to have a certain level of contentment in their lives. They were just fulfilled. They weren't always happy, but there was a sense of fulfillment in their lives, regardless of the circumstances. On the other hand, I also interacted with people that it didn't matter what was going on in their lives. They always seemed to feel like they were stuck. They were in a rut. They weren't going anywhere, right? So we had two extremes and then everyone in between. And in coaching and training and speaking with them and research and just connecting with them differently, I started to recognize a pattern that when we just focus on 6 very specific things, it influences the way that we think, it influences the things that we do, and therefore it influences the results that we create in our lives. So I started sharing these 6 pillars of significance, if you will, with others, and the results that they reported back to me honestly far exceeded even what I thought they were going to be capable of. Both from an individual perspective and a team or an organization perspective, people said that, Pete, when we just stayed focused on the things that matter, we started developing greater relationships with people, both at home and at work. Our culture began to change. Our morale began to change. We became more effective communicators. So many things benefited simply when we stay focused on the things that matter. So what are these 6 pillars? Well, I want to share these with you now. You realize that, or you see that this framework always begins with the concept of choice. From choice, we move into what it means to become rooted in identity. From identity, we move our way to the importance of addressing the fear. From there, we go down to the importance of letting things go so that we can travel to the part of the framework which is all about taking risks or embracing the crazy. And you'll notice that this framework culminates in really what it was all about to begin with, which is the impact that we make on others. And for the rest of our time together, what I'd like to do is dive into these with you now. So let's begin with this first one and this whole concept of choice. Anytime we talk about significance, we need to begin at the source. And at the source is the recognition, the understanding, the embracing that in every moment of every day, in every situation, we always have a choice. We always have a choice. Now, sometimes a lot of people understand this conceptually. Some people take great pride in the fact that we always have a choice. I mean, we have freedom to choose. I want you to consider then how easy it is for us on one hand to acknowledge we always have a choice. And yet on the other hand, depending on the situation, if I were to ask someone, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Their answer could so easily flow out of his or her mouth. I didn't have a choice. Well, which one is it? Is it that we always have a choice, or is it that we sometimes have a choice? And what I'm challenging you with today is to recognize that in every situation, bar none, we always have a choice, because in every situation, there is always a choice to be made. Now, this may seem like a difficult subject to tackle, especially because of today's environment. I mean, it doesn't feel like we have many choices. It seems that in many cases, we are being mandated to do things. We are told when we can go out, where we can go out, if we can stay, where we can't stay, how far apart we're supposed to be from each other, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. So many things are being mandated to us. And in my conversations with my clients and with others, what I hear a lot is a lot of people saying, I just feel like I don't have a choice in the matter. And I get the sentiment behind that. I really do. The problem is it's not true. And so I don't buy into it. Because instead, I think what we're really saying in those moments is that we always have a choice, but we don't always like our options. We always have a choice, but we don't always like our options. Look, sometimes we like our options. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we like the outcomes of our decisions. Sometimes we won't. See, we can be subjective in how we feel or what we think about the options and about the outcomes, as long as we remain subjective to the reality that in every situation, we always have a choice. But see, this is also what makes this whole concept of choice appear to be so cold or so cruel or so confrontational, because at times it is. Look, in a very blunt and candid way, choice doesn't care about whether or not you like your options. Choice doesn't care about whether or not you like the outcomes of your decisions. Choice simply says, given the surrounding circumstances and your experiences, what do you choose to do next? That's what choice is focused on. But see, choice is also what allows us to develop a heightened level of ownership in our lives. And that's what makes choice empowering. We want to develop complete ownership of everything in our life, our past, our present, where we're headed. Own it all. One of the ways that we can elevate ownership in our lives, one of the ways we can elevate this whole concept of choice in our lives is to start paying attention to the words that we use in conversations. And one of my challenges to you with regard to this is to remove the phrase that you see there on your screen. Stop saying, I didn't have a choice. And instead, replace that with either I chose or I choose. Because see, that former phrase, that keeps us in this mindset that somehow life is being done to us, that we're just innocent bystanders, or worse, that we're victims of circumstance. But that latter phrase, that reminds us we're still the ones steering the ship. We don't always like our options, don't always like the outcomes of our decisions, but we always, always, always have a choice. Now, one of the most important choices you will ever make is the choice regarding your identity. Here's what I mean. As you look at the screen, I want you to notice the specific order that these words are in. Feelings, actions, identity. If you think about it, this is how many people operate on a daily basis. Depending on how they feel, it influences what they do. And then their actions over time begin to create and develop who they are. If you feel happy, you will act happy. And then I would say of you that you are happy. If you feel sad, you will act sad. And then I would say that you are sad. Makes sense, right? It's pretty common. And that's the problem. Why? Because feelings are unpredictable. You know this to be true. Think about how different your days are when you are in a good mood versus bad mood. We have experienced this behavioral model at its worst. Here's what I mean. My guess is that the majority of you watching today, at some point, either presently or maybe sometime in the past, you have worked in an environment where you had to gauge the mood of someone else in order to determine the type of day you were going to have. Some of you might actually be sitting next to that person right now, and things just got really awkward. But isn't that an awful environment? I mean, we have to spend the first few minutes of our day trying to figure out which version of this person is showing up, because we don't know, are we getting Hannibal Lecter or are we getting Mary Poppins? We don't know. And the worst part about that situation is when the person you just thought about is in a managerial role. There's so many negative consequences to that, but one important negative consequence is that we can't develop trust with each other on our teams that way. See, we develop trust with each other based on our behavioral consistencies. And if someone is consistently inconsistent, then we are less likely to extend our trust to that person. We are more likely to stay to ourselves or to go out and seek others that we do trust. Now, that in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. The problem is that when we go out and we seek others, that is the formations of our cliques and our silos. But obviously, being trustworthy is a huge component of living in a very significant way. So what does it mean as it relates to this behavioral model? What does it mean as it relates to feelings, actions, identity? Well, it means that we need to shift the order. We need to move into identity, actions, feelings. We need to shift the order. Now, the good news is that many of us have operated from this perspective. You may not have been aware of it. My guess is that some of you watching, you would consider yourself to be a runner. What do we know about runners? Well, runners run in the sun, they run in the rain, they run in the wind, they run in the snow. Well, it doesn't matter what the elements are outside, there are always people out there running. Now, personally and respectfully to the runners who are watching, I think you're crazy. I'm not a runner, and my hamstrings remind me of that. So as much as I try to wrap my head around why these people just got up out of nowhere, I mean, they seem to be content sitting 5 minutes ago, but they're going to go out and they're just going to run around and they enjoy this, although the look on their face says otherwise. Why are they out there running? Well, the answer really is very simple. Because they're runners. That's what runners do. Look, what's the point? Runners run. Speakers speak, writers write, teachers teach, leaders lead. If you are a leader, then by God, continue to lead. How you lead during this pandemic may be different. That you lead should not be different. Why? Because that's what leaders do. Leaders lead. Conversely, complainers complain. Whiners are going to whine. Eeyores are Eeyores. You know who Eeyore is. You may work with a few. If you haven't smiled yet this entire time, you might be the Eeyore, right? Look, identity matters. I am, therefore I do. I am, therefore I do. See, we need to get a better handle of our identity. And we see this playing out in all these different facets of life. We see the struggle. We see it in our nation right now. We are suffering. This isn't a political difference of opinion. No. What we are struggling with for many people is an identity crisis in the country. Really come to grips with, who are we as a country? What do we stand for? We see it in the courts. Courts are struggling because they're saying this, what is our identity all about? And are our actions indicative of that? We also see it with families. Look, a lot of people are spending more time with their family than they ever have before, for better or for worse. But nonetheless, we see families really trying to struggle with and come to grips with this whole idea of who are we as a family? What are we all about? What do we stand for? But we can also ask the same question for ourselves individually. Who are you? What's your identity all about? And one of the best ways we can get to the heart of our identity is to be able to answer the question that you see there on your screen. What is your stand? What do you actually stand for? You see, your stand is what drives you. Your stand is what moves you. Your stand is what gives your life meaning. Notice that I didn't ask about what you're passionate about. Look, I think passion is great, and I hear it talked about a lot, and I love it. The problem is in how many people interpret what it means to be passionate about something. In other words, they usually will describe that they are passionate about something when they have a very strong, positive feeling towards something. Again, great when we feel that way. But as we know, because we discussed previously, that feelings come and go. And this is the reason why you have some people who feel very passionate about something on Monday. By Thursday, they've already forgotten what they were so passionate about. Why? Because they don't feel the same way anymore. Look, it's not just about passion. Instead, when I'm really driving home, as it relates to your stand, is tell me, what is your purpose? What's your purpose? Sometimes people say, Pete, I haven't found my purpose yet. And if that describes you, great. I don't want you to find your purpose. I simply want you to choose it. It's one of the greatest choices we ever get a chance to make. You choose what you want your life to be about. You choose what you find to be meaningful. I want you to think about, what are those one or two words that totally embody everything about you, what you're trying to bring to the world? Look, not who you're trying to be professionally and who you're trying to be personally. Tear down those walls for a second. Believe yourself to be one person who just happens to have many different facets of life. Tell me who you are. Tell me what you stand for. Tell me what you're trying to bring in every aspect of your life. What are those one or two words? Is it faith? Is it love? Is it God? Is it opportunity? Is it family? Is it humanity? Is it fairness? Is it Jesus? Is it whatever it is, right? It doesn't matter to me what it is. What matters to me is that you know what it is for you. Why? Because remember the order: identity, actions. As soon as you determine what your one or two words are, what you actually stand for, well, that's what influences you in every aspect of your life. Your stand is what influences you personally, as a spouse, as a parent, as a friend. Your stand is what influences you professionally, as a leader, as an employee, as a colleague. Everything changes as soon as you become bold and courageous enough to draw your line in the sand and boldly declare that this is who I am and this is what I stand for. But as soon as you identify your stand, I want you to dive into the weeds with it. I want you to struggle with it. I mean, really wrestle with it until it becomes so crystal clear to you what living out that stand looks like. Because you will be challenged on this on a daily basis. By what? The mirror. The mirror will simply ask you, are you? Or are you not? That's one of the greatest gifts that we've been given during this pandemic, is that it has forced people to answer that very specific question. Are you who you say you are, or are you not? Are you that way only when it's easy for you to be that way? Oh, you say that you're kind and you're compassionate and you're dedicated. Are you? Now that we're faced with a little adversity, are you still that way or are you not? One of the things that we need to think about is whether or not we are swayed by convenience or are we driven by conviction? Are you or are you not? See, as it relates to identity, significant individuals, significant teams, significant organizations, they share two things in common. Number one is they have absolute clarity about who they are. And number two is they have the utmost confidence in who they are not. They are who they are, and there's room to grow and develop within that. But they're not spending their time trying to be someone that someone else wants them to be if it's not in alignment with who they choose to be. Identity, actions, feelings. Take a stand. All right, so we've talked a little bit about choice. We've talked about identity. Now we talk about this part of the framework that we don't typically like to talk about. Like it's not common for us to talk about our fears or self-doubts and insecurities, right? Like we don't walk around saying, "Hey, how you feeling today?" Totally inadequate. How about you? Like I'm completely screwing up my life. Nice. You want to get a burger? Like we don't have conversations like that. No. What we do is we present ourselves in a way where you will only see what I want you to see. You don't see the fear and the self-doubt and the insecurity that we all walk around with. It doesn't matter how old you are, what education level you've reached. No. We all walk around with these things simply because we're human. We just don't talk about them. But we need to find out why we continue to possess it in our lives. If we're going to move beyond it, then we need to understand its purpose. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to take my family on a vacation to Ireland, one of the greatest vacations ever. One night we decided we're going to go out to dinner. So we go to this little pub, this restaurant, and we park the car, and I tell the boys, all right, go on inside. Whitney and I had to get something out of the trunk. So Finnegan, who's my older one, runs right up to the door of the restaurant and stops. Declan, who's younger and smaller than him, walks past him, opens up the door. He goes in. Whitney and I follow 10 seconds later. We get seated for dinner. During dinner, a couple walks over to us and they said, "We've been dying to meet you ever since your youngest came through the door." I said, what do you mean? They said the way that he entered the place, it was like he owned it. Declan was 3 at the time. Now, oddly enough, he walked straight to the bar. Don't know what that's all about. Anyway, so we decided to invite them to join us for dinner, which they did. And that's when I met Coleman Kelleher. During dinner, Coleman said, "Pete, have you taken the boys fishing yet?" I said, "No, Coleman, I haven't, but that sounds great." He said, "Where are you staying?" I said, "We're staying in a little town called Kenmare." All of a sudden, he starts writing something down on a piece of paper and he hands it to me. He said, "Look, when you get back to Kenmare, I want you to find this dock. When you find the dock, I want you to ask for a fisherman named Joe O'Sullivan. When you find Joe, you tell him you and I met tonight and see if he'll take you and the family out fishing." I said, "Oh, Coleman, that sounds great. Thank you so much." We finish up dinner. We say goodbye. We go our separate ways. That's Friday night. Saturday morning, we wake up. Whitney says, "So, you want to go try to find Joe O'Sullivan?" I said, "No." She said, "Why not?" I said, "Look, we have no idea where this dock is, first of all. Second of all, we have no idea who Joe O'Sullivan is. Third of all, we don't know what the relationship is between Joe and Coleman. Like, we're not going." She said, "Come on, it'll be fun." I said, "No, we're not going." She said, "I'll wait for you in the car." Here we go, right? That's how we roll. We hop in the car. We find this dock. We pull down. There's a boat, 2 guys sitting in the boat. I walked over. I said, "Excuse me, fellas. Either one of you happen to be Joe O'Sullivan?" One guy raises his head. He says, "I'm Joe." I said, "Hey, Joe, great to meet you. My name's Pete Smith. I'm traveling here with the family. I met Coleman Kelleher last night. He said to come find you, that maybe you'd be willing to take us out fishing one day." And he said, "Coleman Kelleher sent you, did he?" I panicked. I was like, this is awful. Like, this is how it's going to end, right? And no one knows where we are. I wanted to turn to Whitney and be like, "Are you happy now?" Right? Like, this is what was going through my mind. It was almost as if I was giving him like this Godfather moment. You know what I mean? Except we were in Ireland. So it kind of like, it looked like that a little bit, you know? And so all of a sudden he says, "I'd love to come back on Tuesday." So we go on Tuesday and we meet him. He's waiting for us. He has fishing poles set up. We hop in the boat. We spend a few hours. We caught 19 fish with Joe O'Sullivan that day. This is a picture of Joe and the boys when we returned. It was one of the greatest days of our entire vacation. It's also a great reminder of how fear influences us every day. Here's what I mean. Why didn't Finn go through the doors of the restaurant? Probably because he had a fear of what was on the other side. Why? Because it was unknown. That makes sense, right? Was that a bad decision? No. Did anything bad happen to him because he didn't go through the doors? No. Do we still love him? Yeah, on that trip. My reasoning for not wanting to go find Joe O'Sullivan, bad idea? Not necessarily. I mean, I had the best interest of my family at heart, right? So you look at those two things, you say, all right, there's clearly a fear around both of those decisions, but what was the fear really striving for? And you come down to what fear's main purpose in our lives is all about. And its main goal is this: to protect us. To protect us. So your fear will keep you confined. And this is where it will minimize us. It'll keep us confined to what we have already created to be our comfort zone. And anytime we attempt to do something that takes us just beyond what we're currently comfortable with, that is when our fear will be triggered. Now, with that being said, I'm not a fear monger. I'm not coming here to say, unless you address your fears, you're never going to be successful, because that is garbage. Can you never address your fear and still be successful? Yes, you can. But can you be significant? I don't know. Because sometimes the most significant things, the things that mean the most, that require the most of us, are going to exist just outside what we're currently comfortable with. And I wonder, what will you do in those moments? What will you choose to do in that moment? What are some of these fears that people deal with? Gosh, by this point, what aren't fears, right? I mean, becoming irrelevant, losing their job, that's a big one. Looking foolish, being rejected, being wrong, being found out, coming out, missing out, and the list goes on. Look, you know what your fears are. You know whether you have a fear of being disliked. You know whether you're a people pleaser. You know what these common fears are. We need to figure out, how are they minimizing you? We need to ask, what opportunities are you missing out on because you are choosing to stay confined to your current comfort zone? So think about, what conversations are you not having that you need to have? What ideas are you not sharing? What credit are you not being given? What risks are you not taking? Because it's easier to stay in your comfort zone. And yet, it's precisely what we need to do in order to live in a very significant way, is to be able to address that fear so that we can conquer that fear, so that we can move beyond that fear. We've talked about choice, we've talked about identity, we've talked about fears. Now we talk about a really key part of this framework, which is all about the importance of letting go. When athletes train to run faster, many of them will use what's called a resistance parachute to help develop very specific part of the muscles in their legs. Now, depending on the size of the chute, this could add another 15 to 30 pounds of pressure. So this is like running uphill or running in water, running on the beach, right? And the athletes who use this chute report a significant improvement when they decide to release the chute. And in my work with others and with organizations, I can't help but notice an odd similarity, that sometimes the extent of our achievements, the extent of our success, the extent of our significance isn't always going to be based on how much more we take on. In many cases, it's directly proportional to how much we willingly and quickly choose to let go. Look, 30 seconds before my stroke, I probably had 10 different things that bothered me that day. And yet, during the stroke, none of them mattered. It's fascinating to me how much time we spend holding on to anger and resentment and judgment and guilt and shame. And for what? Look, some of you watching right now, you are in an argument with someone either at work or at home, and you'll stay in that argument as long as your main focus is to be right. And it doesn't matter if you're right. The reality is that we are imperfect people living in an imperfect world. What does that mean? The world isn't fair. Promises aren't kept. Expectations aren't going to be met. People are going to disappoint you. You want to know what? At some point, you will disappoint someone else. So what do we choose to do in that moment? Do we choose to stay angry and harbor that resentment? Or can we simply choose to let it go? Not because it's the easier choice, but it is a more freeing choice. Because think about how effective are you going to be showing up as a court management professional carrying all of this baggage on your back? You can't be effective long-term with that. Why? Because you deal with people that's precisely what they have carried in with them. We need to willingly let go of the 99% of the garbage in our lives so that we can focus on the 1% of our life that actually means something. We need to intentionally let it go. What are some of these things that we can let go? I'll give you 3 things. Number 1 is let go of your past. It doesn't matter if you were the most successful you've ever been or in your mind the biggest failure you've ever been. What is consistent is that it's done. It's in the past. Learn the lessons, move on. We also need to learn to let go of people. It is entirely permissible to outgrow people. This isn't about adopting a mindset that somehow we're better than anyone else. No. This is about intentionally distancing ourselves from the cynics, from the Eeyores, from the people who continue to bring us down. It is especially vital for someone like you who is surrounded at times by people who have the tendency to maybe bring you down, to be more intentional of finding people that breathe life into you, that build you up, people that you can then focus on doing the same for them. Let go of the people that continue to drag you down. Let go of certain patterns that you may have in your life. Look, perfectionism isn't some badge of honor. Perfectionism is debilitating. Right? We need to let go of that mindset that somehow we need to be perfect. We're never going to get there. And the fact that we are imperfect is precisely what makes all of us perfect. We need to let that go. If you really want to make a difference in someone's life, our focus needs to be on how we can be influential, not how we need to be right. You want to make a difference in someone's life? Focus on being influential in their lives. Don't focus on the need to be right. Big difference. We need to let go of that, of all of that garbage. Why? Because as we enter this next phase of the framework, here's where all of your critics are going to come out. And I mean, they're going to come out in droves. They're going to say, wait a minute, you want to do what? Why would you want to do that? I think that's crazy. And that's precisely the point. That's why we call this embracing the crazy. It's about not being reckless. It's about being intentional. It's about going out and pursuing something that you deem to be meaningful in your lives, even though you're going to have plenty of people on the sidelines telling you why you can't do it, why you shouldn't do it, and all the other critiques that they bring with them. But yet, if we're going to achieve things that are significant, we need to address this. We need to identify these things in our lives, and we need to do 2 things. Number 1 is we need to possess the guts to actually go out and do it, and we need to value the grind that brings with it. Let me give you an example of each. Let's talk about possessing the guts. There's a story in the Bible about how Jesus walked on water. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the story. I'm going to give you a very quick recap. Jesus' disciples are in a boat in the Sea of Galilee when a storm arises, and the wind and the waves come crashing into the boat, so much so that the disciples feared for their lives. All of a sudden, they see Jesus walking out towards them. One of the disciples, Peter, calls out to Jesus. Jesus calls back to Peter. Peter goes out to be with Jesus. On his way out to meet Jesus, he begins to sink. Jesus walks over, he saves Peter, he calms the storm, everyone's safe, right? That's pretty much the gist of the story. Now, in religious discussions, people will usually focus on Peter's doubt or his lack of faith. In non-religious and secular discussion, we'll usually talk about whether or not Jesus existed, or whether his disciples may have seen an image of him walking on water. Maybe he was walking on land and it was very shallow, right? And so you have extremes of these conversations. My point in sharing this story with you isn't to impart what I believe to be the true version, because honestly, that doesn't matter. Instead, what I find so fascinating about this story is that it really embodies a crucial part about what this particular pillar is all about. And here's what I mean. The significant life isn't one that requires you to be perfect enough to walk on water. The significant life is the one that challenges you to get out of the boat. Agree, disagree, critique the story as you may, you'll get no argument from me. But what doesn't change is the fact that even in the midst of a storm, even when it would be easy to sit back and say, I don't know if now's the best time, someone had the courage, the conviction, the guts to get out of the boat. Sometimes people think rocking the boat is enough. And it's true, maybe at times it is. But sometimes there are people in the boat that have an idea. They want to try something. They want to make a suggestion. They want to go out and do something, and they hold back. And that's precisely one of those moments where do you possess the guts to get out of the boat and move forward? Now, I'd like to say that as soon as you possess the guts, as soon as you step out in faith that way, that all of a sudden stars align and everything's going to be perfect. It's just not true. As a matter of fact, as soon as you step out of the boat, you will be met by a resistance that is so fierce, so unforgiving, so uncompromising at times. And that resistance is the grind. It's the daily activity that is required in order for you to achieve what it is that you want to achieve. That's the grind. And see, what makes the grind so challenging is that it forces you to answer the question, is it worth it? And if you have not connected what you do with your identity, if it is not part of your purpose, if you haven't addressed the fear behind it, if you are still carrying the 99% of the garbage on your back and not focusing on the 1% of your life that actually means something, then the answer is going to be simply no, it's not. See, what makes the grind so challenging is that it wonders, is today the day that you give up? Is today the day that you give in? Is today the day that you quit? Look, the courts need you. People need you. Society needs you. And my challenge to you is to tie back what you do to your purpose, is to embrace the grind, because what you do on a daily basis could be considered a grind. And that's precisely why you're in the position that you're in. Possess the guts. That'll help you get started. Value the grind. That's what's going to help you finish. I want to give you a different way to look at this framework. I choose. I am. I conquer. I let go. I will. Why? For you. Just by focusing on those first 5 pillars, boy, we can't help ourselves but have a huge and positive increase or impact in the lives of others. Think about how different would this world be? How different would your lives be? How different would the courts be? Again, how different would this world be if we simply stayed focused on the things that matter most? So where do we go from here? Look, you've spent a good deal of time with me, and I'm so appreciative of that. But if all I've done for you today is simply share more knowledge with you, then I have failed miserably in my attempt. Because significance isn't just about more knowledge. Significance belongs to the doers, not those who are content to simply talk about what they would do someday. Significance belongs to the doers. Significance is applications based. What does that mean for you? Maybe today's the day that we just highlight and focus on one of the pillars I discussed. Maybe today's the day that we stop making excuses or placing blame or rationalize our decisions, and we simply own it all. And we start choosing what we're going to do next. Maybe today's the day that we take a stand. And I mean, we really get clear about who we are and have our actions be driven by our identity, to confidently be able to answer the question, are you or are you not? With a yes, I am. Maybe today is the day that you address your fear. You can't address what you refuse to see. Maybe today's the day that we realize that what we're so hung up on, it just doesn't matter. And we choose to let that go. Maybe today's the day that we embrace the crazy, that we finally move forward on that idea that we've had, that we've been hesitant to bring to light because we feared what others may say. Maybe today's the day that we just realize we have the guts. We do possess those guts, and we are going to value the grind. Because my ultimate hope for you is that on that day, gosh, years from now, when you look back on your life and you ask yourself, did I live? The answer is a resounding yes. Not simply because you were successful and you were happy, but because you spent your life in a relentless and unapologetic pursuit of significance. Who you are matters, and the work that you do matters. And my final challenge to you is this: matter more. Matter more. Thank you so much for the time you've spent with me today. I hope this presentation has provided value for you. I hope the entire 2020 conference has provided value for you as well. I look forward to when our paths cross again, hopefully in person. Take care.